typically, a normal menstrual cycle would last anywhere from 25 to 35 days. If it's shorter than that, then that would be called polymenorrhea. If it's longer than that, that would be oligomenorrhea or amenorrhea. But within that window, hormones constantly change. So there's two primary hormones that effectively drive this process that everyone talks about, and they're estrogen and progesterone, and luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone, kind of two less well discussed hormones, but they effectively initiate the release of estrogen and progesterone. Now, the menstrual cycle can be broken down into, we would say, 4 different phases. So starting with menstruation, which we would call phase 1. So that's when you're actually losing blood. So the blood in your endometrium lining, so in your uterus, there's like a buildup of tissue which is then lost as blood during this menstruation window. And that typically lasts anywhere from 3 to 7 days. Then after that phase specifically is characterized by very low levels of hormones, so estrogen and progesterone levels are at their lowest. Then you jump into phase 2, which is like the second half of what we would call the follicular phase, and this is just dominated by an increase in estrogen levels. Progesterone is still very low, but estrogen rises to a peak just before you hit ovulation. There's a peak in estrogen, and then estrogen drops and ovulation occurs. Now, at ovulation, there's a release of an egg. So there's like the development of a follicle at this ovulation point, which is typically around day 14. And that is like what we would call mid-cycle if you had like a kind of typical 28-day cycle. Then we jump into what we would call phase 3, which is the start of the luteal phase, where estrogen and progesterone levels increase and remain relatively high. So this is often also called the high hormone phase for around 10 days. And then once they kind of reach that 10-day end of the 10-day period, they start declining, which we would call phase 4, and that's the premenstrual window. Now, during that phase, the decline in hormones initiates this release of these hormone-like substances called prostaglandins. Prostaglandins then drive this inflammatory response that I was talking about in phase 1, but also encourage the contraction of the uterus to then initiate the blood loss. And often people experience symptoms in that premenstrual window and during menstruation as a response really to the changing hormone levels.